Welcome to Speaking Opera. My name is Howard Hart, and I'll be your host today. We have a special guest that's returning to us. This gentleman is a conductor, a pianist, a vocal coach, a composer, and a friend of mine. Benton Hess, welcome.
Thank you very much, Howard. Yes, of all those things, conductor, composer, a friend of mine. The most valued is a friend of mine. I like that a lot.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I mean that.
It's great to be back. I had such a good time last time.
I did too.
Good.
So today, since we do some emailing in between, you mentioned you'd like to talk about some special women in your life that have encouraged you along the way, or you're in various parts of your musical and personal life. So could you tell us about those women?
Yeah, I'd love to, actually. And as I was thinking about this after we had talked about that very thing, I discovered actually that I have 6 important people in my life, 3 men and 3 women. It's interesting how balanced it came in my life. And I'll talk about the women today. And when you have me back, hint, 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 I'll talk about the men in my life. How about that?
That sounds like a plan.
The 3 women in my life are not in any particular order, but they actually might be kind of in order. Adelaide Bishop, Chloe Owen, and Eve Queler. And they are 3 very different people, very, very different people. And they all entered my life. They all kind of exploded into my life, as it were, at very different times in my life and in very different ways. I think I mentioned Adelaide Bishop the last time we talked. She was the one who wrote a note to me on the back of one of her checks because she couldn't find any other paper and asked me to come to Boston University, where I suddenly found myself as the musical director of Boston University Opera Theater at the ripe old age of 21. And I worked there at Boston University but with Adelaide. And that wasn't by any means the only place that I worked with Adelaide, because Adelaide hired me to conduct my very first professional production, which was in Washington, D.C. with the Opera Society of Northern Virginia. It was Il Turco in Italia, the Turk in Italy. And with that production, I got a rave review in the Washington Post. It just went on and on and on about how wonderful the conducting was from Paul Hume, who was a very famous critic in those days, and he was famous for only one reason. He gave Margaret Truman, the daughter of the president, a horrible review. And President Truman did him the favor of saying, "I want to punch that man in the nose." And which instantly made Paul Hume a famous critic, in the Washington Post. So anyway, I had this rave review from the Washington Post, which I used for decades. It was part of my biography and advertising material and all of that. My management used it all the time. It was wonderful to have. And so back to Adelaide now. And so she was the director of that production. And then I worked with her in several other companies. Sometimes I had recommended her as a wonderful director, and sometimes she recommended me as a conductor, and that. As it happens, the last professional opera company that I was affiliated with before I stopped conducting was the Mercury Opera Rochester, which was a really wonderful young company. And unfortunately, it didn't survive. Financially, it was just too much. Rochester is a symphony town, not really an opera town. We can talk about that someday. I think all cities are either opera towns or symphony towns. And the very first opera that Mercury Opera did in 2007, I believe it was Madame Butterfly. And I was very happy to be able to hire Adelaide Bishop to direct this Madame Butterfly, which was, I believe, the last production that she directed. So she gave me my first professional opera that I conducted, and I gave her the last professional opera that she directed. I believe that to be the case. I'm not positive of that, but I think that's what happened. And then unfortunately, she just shy of, I think, a week shy of her 80th birthday, she was in a horrible automobile accident and didn't survive it in Florida. So that was very sad. But anyway, Adelaide Bishop, I adored her. She was a very important person in my life. She was a great director. She had been a really wonderful singer. She was one of the first professional singers at the New York City Opera when it was first founded in New York. She made her debut at New York City Opera at age 19, singing Gilda in Rigoletto. She had started her professional singing career at age 7 with Beverly Sills on the Major Bowes Amateur Hour. Oh. Yeah. So anyway, she was a very, very interesting lady. The next woman on my list is Chloe Owen. When I was teaching at Boston University, when I was the musical director of the opera program there, Chloe Owen was a voice teacher on the voice faculty there. She had had a career already, a very good career in Germany, as a matter of fact. Maybe not in Germany. I think she was in Switzerland. But and she had made quite a number of recordings while she was there. She was well known. She's listed rather provocatively in Ned Rorem's diaries and all of that. Anyway, Chloe was a rather controversial voice teacher because she incorporated all sorts of things that you might not necessarily expect to come from a voice teacher. She would talk about Alexander technique. She would talk about Christian Science, all sorts of things that she thought would help people sing better. And so she was somewhat controversial, but the people with whom she was successful, she was very successful. She wasn't successful with everybody, but the people with whom she was successful, she was very successful. In 1970, Chloe asked me if I would play a big recital for her in New York City. And it was my very first New York recital, big New York recital in Alice Tully Hall. And I was 23 at the time. And the recital, and I was thrilled, of course, to have this opportunity. The recital was, the whole first half was the Debussy 5 Poèmes de Charles Baudelaire, which is 30 minutes nonstop of nothing but arpeggios and complicated stuff on the piano and all, starting with Debussy's most difficult song, Le Balcon, which is quite a long song. It's about 10 minutes long, maybe 12, something like that. And so here I am walking out on the stage of Alice Tully Hall for the very first time, and I sit down and I have to play Le Balcon. It was kind of terrifying, but I think it went well. And the rest of the recital was typical Chloe. After the intermission, she sang 9 of Richard Strauss's most difficult, unbelievably difficult songs for the voice that very few people even sing because most people can't sing them. And this was, Chloe just loved to do this. Chloe could and did sing anything. And then she ended the recital with the Dvorak Gypsy songs, which she sang in Czech. And it was very nice. But let me tell you a story, actually a quick story about the encores for this program. Chloe and I never talked about doing encores. We never talked about doing encores. And I had no idea what on earth she was going to do. Okay. So we finish, I'm exhausted. It's my first big New York recital, and for me, it's over, right? So we walk off stage, and she has a little table back there with a pile of music so high, like that. And she has a pitcher of water there and a glass, and she pours herself a glass of water, and the audience is going crazy. It was a big audience, by the way. She had a kind of a cult following in New York. which I didn't know until that recital, actually. And she poured herself a glass of water, and she drank a glass of water as she looked through the stuff she had. And she pulled out the Chi bel sogno di Doretta Potendo, from Rondine. And she handed this to me, and she handed it to me. She says, I think we'll start with this one. So, fine, that's fine. I play it at least once a week. And have for years already. No, I was only 23 at that time, but at least I knew it and I felt comfortable. I didn't really need to practice it. So, and it goes the way it goes. So I wasn't terrified that she was going to do something and leave me in the dust behind her or anything. So we walked on the stage and we did Chi bel sogno. And it was fine, and the audience went crazy. And she's taking bows, and we came off the stage, and when we went back on the stage and took a bow, and then we went on the stage. And then I insisted that she go by herself and take a bow. I am assuming that it's over. No, it's not over. The audience is still applauding. And she goes to her little table, and she grabs this little piece of music. She says, we'll do this next. And she starts walking on the stage. And it is Hugo Wolf's Die Spreude, which I had never played. I didn't know what this was. And I'm walking on the stage at Alice Tully Hall about to play it for the very first time. Oh, anyway, it's not easy either. It's not easy. It's a finger twister kind of thing, and it's like an F sharp or something, or B major or something like that. Lots and lots of accidentals and all this kind of stuff. And of course, my adrenaline is going like, oh my God, what am I going to do here? So anyway, I just nailed in and I got it all together, and we got through it somehow. And I guess it was okay. She didn't cringe or anything, or it didn't come to a screeching halt. So I guess it was okay. And the audience still applauded, and bravoed after that and all that kind of stuff. Luckily, that was the last. Well, I think it was the last one. I couldn't even think anymore. I was so angry. And she would do that to me. But anyway, that's the way I can hardly even play this song, Die Spreude, even today without becoming angry at that moment. Anyway, so I did several concerts with Chloe over the next few years that I was in Boston, and I learned so much from her. She was such a consummate musician. We did, on one of our recitals, we did a song cycle called The Mystery by Carlisle Floyd. And Carlisle was a friend of mine, and I thought that Chloe was doing these songs really well. So I made a recording of our recital on which we did these, and I sent it to Carlisle, and he wrote me back and said, this is the best performance of this cycle that I have heard since Phyllis Curtin sang the premiere, which I think was just really, really lovely. And Chloe loved hearing that for sure. I remember once she and I were working on a song called Jazz dans la nuit, Jazz in the Night by Roussel. And we got to this part where she's singing about a saxophone playing in the night, in this steamy hot night in the park, and all that kind of stuff. And I remember I'm playing along, and she says, "Put some ass in it." You have to beat that out on a podcast.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, that's good. That's
Absolutely
good.
not.
Put some ass in it. Well, I knew exactly what she meant, so I did. It's exactly what it needed. She was just wonderful. I am currently actually working on putting together a CD. I have a live performance of a recital that she and I gave in 1971 in Boston. Did you ever hear her sing, Howard?
No, unfortunately not.
She
No,
was a good singer.
no,
She-
I remember her and I met her, but I never heard her sing, unfortunately. You make me curious now that you're talking about her. I wish I had.
Yeah.
I feel like I've missed out on something.
I'll make sure you get a copy of this,
Yeah.
CD for sure. I'm producing it myself, and I'll use your podcast as a platform for
Absolutely.
telling people about it, if I may.
Absolutely.
And then I moved to New York in 1975 from Boston to New York. And Chloe had moved to New York as well by that time. Yes, I think that's true. And she was living on West 86th Street, and I was living on West 72nd Street. Early on, just right after I moved to New York, I got a call one day from a woman whose name I knew, but I didn't really know exactly what she was all about. And this person was Eve Queler. And Eve Queler was the founder and the artistic director of Opera Orchestra of New York, UNI, which is, I think it's still going on, although Eve isn't the artistic director anymore. It's really quite a wonderful organization. Eve started this organization to give herself a chance to conduct, because when she founded this, it was almost impossible for a woman to get opportunities as an orchestra conductor. There weren't very many at all. And she wanted to conduct. She had been assistant conductor at New York City Opera for quite a while. She was a fine pianist, a wonderful musician. She had been a horn player. She had perfect pitch. She had synesthesia, so she saw colors when she heard music. And she was a very, very interesting lady. So anyway, she called me up and she asked if I could come, if I would be available to play rehearsals for Massenet's Le Cid. And I looked at my calendar, and I hadn't been in New York for very long, so it wasn't very difficult for me to clear away some time during the time that she was having rehearsals with the singers in her apartment on West End Avenue. And I had no idea what a big deal this was, actually, what a big deal Opera Orchestra of New York was, and how well thought of she was. And so I went, and I had no idea what I was getting into. So I went to the first rehearsal, and she said, she said, I understand that you're a wonderful musician, and I also I hear from people that you're a wonderful sight reader, so I'm not even going to try and get you a score until you arrive. I'll give you a score when you arrive. You can sight read the first rehearsal. It's not going to be all that difficult. So I said, okay, that's fine. Okay. So I went to this rehearsal, and I find myself playing this duet, sight reading this duet. Placido Domingo is standing right there, singing in my left ear, and Grace Bumbry is standing right here, singing in my right ear. And I'm sight reading this duet.
At least you had two major voices that are wonderful.
I know, and two loud voices too. I mean,
Really?
if I just play a little softer, they're not even going to notice that I'm playing wrong notes. Anyway, that was just the first, and then I continued to play the rehearsals for that production, and there's even a recording of that performance in Carnegie Hall, as a matter of fact. And if you let's see, I conduct the backstage bandas. You know, there are lots of bands backstage and in balconies and stuff. So I'm going all over the theater conducting this fanfare there and conducting this band here and all. It was great fun, really, really great fun. And all her performances were in Carnegie Hall in those days. And I did, and maybe the best thing that came from this, besides learning a lot of wonderful repertoire that nobody else was doing, was the fact that she introduced me to so many people that became so important in my musical life. I think then maybe even the next opera that I did with her was Smetana's Dalibor, and that was with Nicolai Gedda, who became a really close friend of mine, and we worked a lot together. over the years. She introduced me to him, and so I worked with people like, Aprile Milo, Renée Fleming. Renée Fleming had just moved to New York City, as a matter of fact, and she was doing a couple of Russians. She was doing a group of Rachmaninoff songs on a recital someplace, and she asked Eve Queller, who was interested in Renée even then, just fresh out of school. She asked Eve if she knew anybody who could coach Russian, and she said, "Oh yes, my pianist Benton Hess coaches Russian. He's studied Russian. He knows what he's doing." So Renée came to me. I think I'm maybe one of the first, if not the first, vocal coaches that Renée came to in New York when she arrived. Let's see, who else did I work with? Oh, Hvorostovsky, Dmitri Hvorostovsky. It pains me now just to think that we lost him so young. Can you imagine what he might have been able to do had he lived longer? It's just horrific. I feel so badly about that. Anyway, so, and Eve Queller remains in my life. She's the only one still living, actually, of my three ladies. And I'm also in touch with her daughter, who is a singer in a very different genre of music. She sings popular music and jazz, that is. And Liz is her name. It's wonderful. So those are the three ladies in my life, besides my mother. I think I should mention my mother, actually, probably should. My mother tried to be my first voice teacher when I was 5 years old, and that just didn't work. I'm a Leo, and she was a Taurus. For any astrologers that's listening now, that's all you need to know. It was quite something. But my mother was a wonderful musician. She's one of those people that could play any song you wanted her to play. You'd ask her to play a song, and do you know this song? And she'd say, "Oh yes, what key?" She played it in any key you wanted it. And she could do all sorts of things that I can't do. I can't do that. So, and she was so supportive. My mother was very supportive. She wasn't supportive when it didn't call for support. There were a few things that I did, that I played, as a matter of fact, in my youth, that probably should not have happened the way they did. But she was wonderful. She really was. Your turn, Howard.
You're a tough act to follow, Benton.
I don't know.
Very emotional listening to you and thinking about. I was at Eve Queller I was at many of her performances.
Yeah.
And I was a fan, and she was always very nice to me.
Yeah.
I would meet her at parties and so forth. It seems so like a million years ago.
Yes.
A million years ago.
It does, doesn't it? I'll tell you I should mention June Anderson. There's a person we should talk about. Sure. June Anderson is a great singer, a really great singer. I don't know if she's still singing. Is she still singing? I think
I know she was in Candide, right? And
yes.
With that, yeah, and she was very good in that.
Yes.
I think kind of I'm not sure she's singing at all anymore, but I really can't say.
She sang, and she was so interested in interesting repertoire. The first thing I did with her, I think it was the first thing I did the first thing I did with June was at the Lake George Opera Festival. June was about to sing her first Gilda with Opera Theater of Rochester. No, I'm bigger pardon. I'm saying at the Lake George Opera Festival. Yes, I said that right, didn't I? The Lake George Opera Festival. June Anderson came there one summer when I was conducting there, She came because she wanted to coach Gilda. She was about to sing her first Gilda at Opera Theater of Rochester, right here in Rochester.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I didn't live in Rochester then. I had no idea I was ever going to live in Rochester. But I was there at the Lake George Opera Festival, and the director, Cynthia Auerbach, a wonderful director, asked if I would be free to play her coaching sessions with June, with this wonderful soprano, June Anderson. Sure, absolutely. So I played all of those, and then June came to me a couple of times in New York for coachings, and then I ran into her at Eve Queller's because she was singing Sonnambula. I think that was the first piece I did with her with opera orchestra, Sonnambula. And the interesting thing about this, maybe for your listeners, is that June Anderson's cover was Renée Fleming.
Ah, I didn't know that, or when she did that.
And in those days with Uni, the cover cast got a performance. It was not in New York. It was sometimes it was in Pennsylvania, sometimes it was in New Jersey, sometimes on Long Island, sometimes in Boston. Actually, we did an Andrea Chenier in Boston. I remember years ago with the cover cast. And I don't remember where Renée's performance of Sonnambula was, but I do remember that a few days before the performance in Carnegie Hall, I was given the task of giving the lecture for the board, and it was open for anybody who wanted to come in Cami Hall, directly across the street from Carnegie Hall.
Mm-hmm.
And I gave a lecture, and we did a few excerpts from the opera, from Sonnambula, sung by the cover cast. And I wanted Renée to sing the final scene. But if she was going to sing the final scene, she didn't want to have to sing a lot right before it. And
that's
I said,
understandable considering the final scene.
Yes, that's right.
Really?
So that's the way I planned it. I had her sing just a little bit of a duet at the beginning of the opera, and then I used everybody else, the baritone aria, a tenor aria, in the middle. And my little speech just before I presented Renée singing the final scene, I said something like La Sonnambula, the opera La Sonnambula, was no stranger to New York, has been no stranger to New York. A lot of famous people have chosen to sing Sonnambula in New York as kind of an introduction. As a matter of fact, Callas sang Sonnambula in Carnegie Hall, as a matter of fact. And Montserrat Caballé sang Sonnambula in New York as kind of an introduction when she was just beginning to be recognized. And on October the 22nd, 1883, the very night that the Metropolitan Opera started, the Metropolitan Opera opened with Faust. But that same night, the general manager of the Music Academy, which was downtown on 14th Street, just to get back at the Metropolitan Opera for starting a new opera company, rival opera company, at the Academy of Music, they programmed La Sonnambula with Etelka Gerster. And then I said, and someday you're going to be able to tell your grandchildren that you heard Renée Fleming sing La Sonnambula. And Renée began to cry. It was so sweet, actually. It took her by surprise. She wasn't quite ready for it. That tells you a lot about what kind of a person Renée is, actually. What Renée was and remains to be. She's a very sweet lady. Humble. There's humility there. That's nice.
Now I'm going to ask you about a soprano in a roundabout way, if I may, for a moment. A number of years ago, I went to hear Angela Mead in Il Pirata at Caramore. Remember when Caramore was outside in the theater outside?
Yes,
And we went every year. That was actually a birthday gift every year to me from two of my close friends. And I love Angela Mead. So they said, let's go hear Angela Mead in Il Pirata. I said, I'm ready. And during the performance, this young man was standing there. He was singing, you know who I'm going to be talking about yet?
No, not
Okay.
yet.
So everyone's waiting, and obviously had some kind of following. I was not familiar with him. Santiago Ballerini came out, and unbelievable. He got enormous ovation, and actually it's on YouTube. Somebody's put the whole performance on YouTube. Amazing. He had it all, and he had this tiny little thin mustache, very handsome, but they were fabulous together, and they stole the show. It was incredible. But when he sang his second big aria, he let it all go, and it was amazing. So I liked him so much that my friend said, well, we have a surprise for you for your next gift. Since you liked him so much, we'll take you to La Fille du Régiment in Saratoga.
Oh, yes.
So out he comes, and he did a cartwheel on stage. He's very fit, still very fit. And I become a fan. I follow him around, or my friends make it possible for me to follow him around. I mentioned the Lucia. I found out who it was. So we went to Fille du Régiment, and the soprano knocked me for a loop. I'll go back to that.
That was
Keely Futterer. And she was amazing. You probably know the theater, it's right. It's a small theater. He was incredible. And she was too, amazing. I just wanted to mention he's coming back. We're going to Cincinnati, because you had asked me in our first podcast about who the Lucia was. And the Lucia is Raven McMillan.
I just by name.
Yeah, she's singing the Lucia, but as a gift, I'm getting that as my early birthday gift this year. We're going to hear him sing, I believe, his first Edgardo, but then he's coming back with the group. Do you know Teatro Nuovo?
Yes, it's Will Crutchfield's.
Yeah. He used a lot of younger singers. He's bringing him back, and he's used, obviously in the Pirata. They're doing Pagliuto in July 19th, and Santiago Ballerini is singing Pagliuto. So where I'll be on the 19th if you're looking for me.
Now that's very interesting, actually, because Pagliuto, I did Pagliuto with Opera Orchestra of New York with Fabio Armigliato singing Pagliuto. So I'm used to Pagliuto, a much heavier voice than Santiago.
Well, I'm wondering, Santiago's voice carries very well, but it's a lyric voice. I'm wondering if they'll do the complete score with no cuts, because there so many of these Donizetti operas and Bellini operas have so heavily cut.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'll be astonished if they do it uncut. Although Will is pretty much a stickler for doing it the way it came out of the box.
So I will go on about Santiago Ballerini later on in another one of our podcasts, because I'm a huge fan. And if we go to, and we'll go to Keely in a minute, but I just want to mention something to you for our next time. Two things. Did you find out who?
No.
Who
And I have looked.
Priestesses. Have you done any research?
I have.
I'm going to do some investigation on this. Does anyone who's watching this today have any idea? I don't think anyone does really, but who the high priestess was on Renata Tebaldi's first recording of Aida with Verdi conducting? It's the only Aida I know of where they don't list a high priestess. So we'll leave that open for another day. And we'll talk about it, I guess. Should we have another quiz today? Do we dare?
Well, I don't know, but I want to tell a quick story before we move on to the next thing, because
okay, we'll go to Keely after this. Yeah.
No, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay.
Speaking of the Caramore Festival, I think it was maybe the second year that it was in existence. I was living in Boston at the time, and I went to New York and was staying with a couple of friends. You had a couple of friends who took you to Caramore Festival, and I had a couple of friends who took me to Caramore Festival. We drove up there to see Semele. It was a concert performance, of course, Semele, the Handel Semele, with Beverly Sills.
Oh,
And
I didn't know she did that there. That's interesting.
yes. And I have to think of a name before I continue with this story. As a matter of fact, who was the French Canadian tenor? Leopold Simoneau. Leopold Simoneau was the Jupiter. And Elaine Bonazzi was the Juno. She's saying,
really not a bad group.
Yes, right. And something happened in this performance, actually, that taught me something that I think was a really good lesson to learn. And I have repeated this story with many students along the way. What happened is Semele has about maybe 5 arias for the soprano, and every one is faster and higher than the one before it. And if it wasn't written faster and higher than the one before it, then Beverly made sure that the person who wrote her cadenzas and everything made it faster and higher than anything she did so before. Roland Gagnon was his name. Roland Gagnon,
yeah.
was her coach in those days. And so she kept singing, and of course it was, we'd already seen her on the cover of Time magazine. They had already done Julius Caesar. She had already done Baby Doe. Everybody knew who Beverly Sills was. She was a star then, and the whole audience went to hear Beverly Sills in person, right? So she sang her first aria. Everybody leapt to their feet, and brava forever, and just waiting around. Then a few other arias from other people, and then she sang her second aria, brava, everybody on their feet, and every ovation began to be bigger. And then after about her fourth aria or so, the very next thing, we're just putting ourselves together from being on our feet and shouting brava yet one more time and all that. Leopold Simoneau stood up on the other side of the stage and sang, "Where'er you cool gales shall fan the glade," without a single ornament in it, not one. And it was so beautiful. It was so magical what he could do with the phrase, and not toy around with it, not make it higher, not do anything with it. He had us all we just melted in our seats. It was so fantastic. And he got the biggest ovation of the night. And of course, it's a concert performance, so Beverly's sitting there on the stage. And it was very clear she didn't know quite what happened. And none of us knew quite what happened either. This was supposed to be Beverly's night, right? But it was when honesty triumphed over artifice. Now, I love Beverly, and I think Beverly's a great artist, so don't get me wrong. I'm not putting Beverly down. We all learned something that night, including Beverly, I think.
Yeah.
It was really wonderful. That was my one and only Caramore experience, actually.
We were going every year. Sumi Jo sang a few years. She was wonderful. We heard her in, she sang Puritani, Sonambula. I believe that's where Angela Mead sang her first normal. She was very good. We saw her in Washington.
I remember.
Really. Yeah. So we have to go back to Keely, so we won't forget to talk about her today. I know, so a roundabout way of putting it a cue for Santiago, because you know how I am. You know, I have to do that because that's how, as you said, it's like water, right? I need to have so you know Keely in a way other than singing, right? You know her family, and I'm curious to know more about that. Actually, I think our listeners would like to know more about it too.
Yeah, for a decade, just about almost exactly a decade, in the 90s, all the way up to 2000, I was musical director for Arkansas Opera Theater, which for part of that time performed in a very nice place, the Wildwood Park for the Performing Arts. Brand new. It was brand new in those days. Really lovely, lovely facility. And my orchestra, which was the Arkansas Symphony. I don't know if they call themselves a philharmonic. I don't remember. That orchestra had as its principal flutist Keely Futterer, a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful flutist, who was married to an oboist, but the oboist was not in that orchestra, but I knew him. I met him on a few occasions when he came to hear Karen play, came to see the operas and all of that sort of thing. Now, I knew that they had children, but I didn't meet the children yet, or if I did meet the children, I don't remember meeting them. But when I went to teach at Eastman, several years later, all of a sudden shows up this wonderful soprano to work on her master's degree at Eastman, whose name was Keely Futterer. And I said, "Oh, I knew a Futterer. Where are you from?" "I'm from Arkansas, Dover, Arkansas." "Oh, I bet there's a connection here. You know Karen and Ken Futterer." "Yes, they're my parents." And so we had a wonderful time working together there at Eastman. She sang a really wonderful performance of Suor Angelica there.
Wow.
And she also sang, I should have done a little research on this before we talked about Keely, because I don't remember what else she sang, but she did a lot of singing while she was in Eastman.
It's a very pure voice, very beautiful.
It's
beautiful
a wonderful
sound.
The thing about Keely has a problem that a lot of wonderful singers have. She doesn't sound like anybody else. So people don't know what to do with her. And this happens a lot.
Interesting.
It happens a lot in the business.
And yet a lot of arguing goes on about people sounding too much the same. There are a number, I won't mention names, but there are a number of mezzo sopranos who sound the same. If you don't know who's singing, you wouldn't know who's singing.
Yes.
They sound almost identical.
So many of the voice teachers today have gotten it in their minds that singing in chest voice is somehow dangerous. And you cannot sing any of that. You cannot sing any Verdi repertoire, Verdi mezzo repertoire, or Wagner mezzo repertoire without singing in chest voice. You cannot. And when you look back at all of the old bel canto treatises, they all begin with chest voice.
All of the older singers sing in chest. It's amazing. Every time I go back to the record of singing, I'm like, wow, she's really, the sopranos are singing in chest.
Yes, that's right.
Without a break. Without a break.
When you're young and you don't know what you're doing and all of that kind of stuff, just cavalierly just go into open chest voice. Of course, it's not a good idea. But a lot of the students leave undergraduate school thinking that singing in the chest voice is somehow going to be detrimental to their vocal health. And it's not true. And so that's the reason that you don't hear these people very often. People singing this repertoire very often. So anyway, back to Keely.
Mm-hmm.
Keely and I got to be good friends actually, and she came to my summer program, Si Parla Si Canta, a couple of times, a couple of years actually, and she's a favorite there in where Si Parla Si Canta performs.
Delightful.
Yeah, they all love her. And as it turns out, her sister Erin, who is a wonderful horn player. By the way, Keely and her sister Erin both got their doctorates at Eastman School of Music. Keely in voice and Erin in horn, French horn. She's a wonderful horn player and a brilliant woman. And she works part-time in a landscape place that does landscaping, and she takes care of my
surroundings.
Mes jardins.
Like Louis the 14th.
Well, it's not Versailles, but hey. It's not
So
quite.
Can we go back to NEC just for a moment? Because I actually got a couple of emails about I received a couple of emails about our last podcast. So I'd like to be clear about something. And I didn't mean to leave people out. When I was joking with you about Beethoven, there's a statue of Beethoven inside of New England Conservatory of Music, and people used to meet there because
it's right at the front door.
It's a beautiful, beautiful statue, and you can find it. You can't miss it. And I think a lot of people use it as a place to meet. So I apologize to people by sort of talking about it, but not clarifying.
I'll meet you with Beethoven, yes.
And then I will ask you, because I'm feeling very nostalgic today, could you say a few words about Uta Graf? Because, I have this thing about, she was so nice to me when I met her, and I've never forgotten how nice she was. A friend of mine, somebody actually I was dating, studied with her for a short time, and it was kind of a rocky road, but she was so nice to me when I met her. I never forgot it. So, and you told me you knew her, you met her and played. Did you play for her?
I played in her studio, not a lot, but a few times I played in her studio, and I really enjoyed it. But it could be a rocky road. You did not want to be on her bad side. Absolutely, you did not. I mean, if you hadn't done your homework, you better call in sick, because she had a temper for sure. But she was a very good teacher for those people. My impression was she was a very good people for those people who sang her repertoire particularly. And people who already had a pretty solid technique. I don't think she was very interested in teaching technique, to tell you the truth. I don't think it was because she couldn't teach technique. I don't think she wanted to. She wanted to get to the music. That's what she was there for. She wanted the music.
What do you mean by that? Right, get to in.
Well, in a voice lesson, you do first. They almost always do a lot of vocalizing and singing scales and arpeggios, and that's when the voice teacher usually dispenses the bon mot, the good stuff that gives them ideas about their technique and all of that kind of stuff. But Madame Graf, she very often, in my experience, she said, "Oh, we have a good pianist today." She would say, "We have a good pianist today. So are you warmed up?" Which meant that we weren't going to do scales and arpeggios. We were going to do the music, and that's what she wanted to do. That's what she was really interested in. The most what shall I call it? It was an amazingly moving event that we all shared with her, those of us who were there. She sang the Strauss Four Last Songs with the New England Conservatory Orchestra. Prausnitz was the conductor in those days. I don't remember his first name. He conducted and she sang the Four Last Songs. I found out just before the recital, it wasn't publicized, but I found out from one of her students actually that her mother had died the night before.
Wow.
And she was singing the four last songs. Prausnitz offered to let her off the hook, and they had other things they could have played, or they could have canceled the concert, postponed the concert, whatever. No, she insisted on singing it because her mother would have wanted her to.
That's amazing. I'd never heard that.
And it was very moving. I get a little verklempt even just thinking about it now. It was quite amazing. I don't know what happened to her. She
lived to be fairly old. I think she retired to Connecticut, and she was teaching. She taught in many different places. According to Wikipedia, if I'm not mistaken, she actually was considered, I thought she was like an adjunct teacher, but I think she actually taught at the conservatory, right? Do you know how that worked?
I think she did.
Yeah.
I don't remember that they ever called anybody an adjunct.
Okay.
At New England.
So she was there for a while. She actually taught in quite a few places. What's interesting about her recorded repertoire, very interesting, is she recorded a lot of music. Some of it 20th century. She recorded Bach cantatas. She's on the first recording. I've forgotten who's conducting it, but Harnoncourt's in the orchestra of the first attempt at trying to do Orfeo with something like original instruments. It was like a mix. And Uta Graf is on that recording.
Oh.
She's on a lot of recordings, and the Tales of Hoffman from the Met, and she got around. And she's an interesting person. It's strange. I think my whole thing about her is you never forget when someone's nice to you, especially when you're young. And I was like in my early 20s, and I was interested in talking to her about her career. And as she reminded us, I think when we talked last time, singers like to talk about their careers, right? Especially when it's good stuff.
Yes.
Recorded Frauenleben and a lot of recordings that I've been digging up on 10-inch recordings. It was really interesting. She did different types of music, and the voice was actually kind of light and high.
Yes.
In the sound. I really liked the way she sang, but it was more about the connection.
I wonder if she and Chloe knew each other, because I think of them as very much the same kind of, they had the same kind of personality. They were driven in a way by the music itself.
Yes.
By the music itself. And that was the first thing. It wasn't that they were promoting their careers. They wanted to make sure that the music was done well and properly, and all of that. And Chloe, to go back to Chloe for a second, and that is that Chloe, when she was in Europe, she told me that she had gotten herself into some kind of vocal trouble. She was singing a lot, and she was singing heavy stuff. And on the early recordings that I have of Chloe singing, including Bach, as a matter of fact, there's a recording of her singing the Christmas Oratorio. She's the soprano solo in the Christmas Oratorio. It's very kind of thick, and it's a beautiful sound, but it's not the Chloe's voice that I remember at all. And she discovered actually that she was getting tired more easily. She didn't feel right about it. She couldn't do what she wanted to do with her voice. So she took a little time out, and she reconstructed her vocal technique. I don't know if she did it by herself or she did it with help. I have no idea. But she reinvented herself, and when she came out, she could still sing the heavier stuff, but in a very different way.
Mm-hmm.
And she suddenly could sing off the end of the keyboard. The first thing I ever heard Chloe sing was Queen of the Night. Boston University, way before I started teaching there, Boston University did a production of the Magic Flute, and they didn't have a student Queen of the Night, so Chloe stepped in and did it there in the Huntington
With the high Fs?
Yeah, well, of course. You have it no other way.
Otherwise, why sing it?
All
That's
right.
what everyone's waiting for. Now,
No other way.
So I've got to left you off the hook today because I think we're getting there for next time. And I'm going to let you do this on your own. Can I put you on the spot?
Sure.
I like doing this once in a while. You mentioned that your father loved Maria Callas and bought all of her recordings, and that you as a young man loved Renata Tebaldi and were collecting, at that point, you would collect her recordings. And we both know that both of them have actually said it's documented that the rivalry actually helped their careers. It really did. So for our next meeting, are you going to come back to us again?
Oh, I'd love to.
So your homework, why am I saying that? Anyway, because I want to be, it's like sitting in your living room talking to you. This is a wonderful experience. So think about the differences, why the rivalry happened, and what was the same, what wasn't the same, and, however you want to go towards it. And
I'll be happy to talk about that right now if you want to, because I've been thinking about this for years.
Well, I would say you're on, Maestro.
You want me to start talking about this now?
I certainly do.
Okay, here we go. Here's the deal. What we have to do is we have to look at the music that they sang and by whom this music was written. And if we do that, we discover that Renata Tebaldi made most of her best singing in Puccini or composers that wrote music like Puccini wrote music. And Maria Callas made her career singing Verdi or people who wrote music like Verdi. And how do these guys write differently? Here's the way. Puccini writes music this way: middle, 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 high note. Middle, 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 high note. Middle, 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 high note. That's the way Puccini writes. Verdi writes music this way, and if I were sitting at the piano when I talk to people about this, I just play glissandos up the scale. Verdi. This is the way Verdi writes music. Glissando up the scale, glissando down the scale. Glissando up the scale, glissando down the scale. And it just depends on the voice, which of these two styles suits you better. So Renata Tebaldi, she's very, very happy singing all night in her middle voice and just singing an occasional IC. She's very happy doing that. Callas doesn't like that very much. Callas likes to run the voice. She runs the voice up and down the scale. She has a good time doing that. And that's what makes them different, actually. And I don't know, I've never heard anybody talk about that really. And but I wonder about, this is something that I wonder about. The conductor, for instance, that insisted that Maria Callas, who was singing Brunhilde at the time, who insisted that Maria Callas should jump in and sing Puritani,
that's right, it's
Puritani. Puritani, replacing a colleague who was ill, and on a couple of weeks' notice, something like that. And Maria Callas says, "Well, if Tullio Serafin says that I can do that, well, who am I to say I can't?" Of course. So she did it. A little bit later, a matter of just a couple of years, I think later, Tullio Serafin asked Renata Tebaldi to sing Norma.
Yeah, I don't get that. I don't
get it at all.
I mean,
I think I could have told Tullio Serafin. I'm sorry, this sounds so.
Maybe he had too many espressos or something. I don't know.
I think I could have told him, no, she can't sing Norma.
It's the problem would be the agility. My only, so far I get what you're saying, and I would agree with you, but Maria Callas had a 3-octave range, which Tebaldi in her heyday never had. I love them both.
Right.
But what you said, my experience, I grew up, I loved Tebaldi, and that middle voice was gorgeous. And I think comparing them is so unfair. They're so different. They're
Oh, yeah,
so different.
absolutely. Absolutely. And thanks to my father, so I've given a little tribute to my mother, and now I'll give a tribute to my father, because my father, he brought home a stack of records like this from his trip to Chicago, where he happened to be there exactly on the day when Maria Callas was singing in concert. Oh my goodness. He fell totally in love with her. She walked on the stage on a red carpet, dragging a white ermine behind her. What's not to fall in love with her, right? Yeah. So anyway, he fell totally in love with her. My mother was jealous. He fell totally in love with her, brought home all of these recordings, which became it's what we listen to all the time at home. Lucky me. I mean, how it couldn't be better. Not only did I learn all of this music by listening to these recordings, but I learned the music by listening to the very best person singing this music. You know, all of this bel canto stuff. Next time we meet,
yes,
I should be on my phone, and I should be downstairs where I have my entire downstairs is just covered with photos and letters and autographs from 19th century divas and divos.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to give you a tour of that.
I think we have a plan.
Collection. That would be fun to do, actually. And I'm so interested, even what we know, we only have recorded singing from about 1903, 1904, 1905, somewhere in there, when they made the very first wax cylinder recordings. And it's so interesting to hear the difference in style, just like what we talked about with the Handel, and also the taste that people had in voices. Mm-hmm. It seems that in those days, in those early days of very early days of the 20th century, people like that sort of a very quick
heavy
flutter in the voice. They like flutter in the voice. And of course, they got away with portamenti in Mozart and Baroque that mm-hmm. they wouldn't let us do anymore. But you have to realize that those people that were singing and making those recordings then are a lot closer to the people who actually wrote that music.
Absolutely.
Who premiered that music. So did they do portamento in Mozart and Baroque? Did they do that? I don't know. You can't always convince me that they have all the answers today.
One thing about living in New York, and I'm not trying to put down Boston because Boston's my home, but Boston's not an opera town the way New York is. New York, you can go to the opera every night somewhere. And unfortunately, the funding here is really not strong. And, Sarah Caldwell is for another time, but, because she did magnificently wonderful performances, but there was always a funding problem there and other issues too. But she did get a lot of fine singers and did some wonderful things. Wonderful.
Oh yes.
She had. I remember when Renata Tebaldi sang Bohème, and there was this tenor that no one. Were you there for that?
No.
Placido Domingo was the tenor. And nobody knew who he was. No, seriously, it was like that long ago. Am I that old, Benton?
No.
He's a few years older than I am, but I remember going and everyone was going, who is this guy? Because they were there because it was Renata Tebaldi. And it was actually, that was Sarah Caldwell, that production.
Yes.
And he was wonderful. He was very young. It was early on in his career and he was just great. I loved Domingo. Really, so many great nights. So we should probably make a plan for the next time.
Yeah. What's next for you?
Thank you. So when I clean my house, which is sometimes, I'm not a hoarder, but I do have, I have to be careful how I explain this so I don't sound like a total lunatic, but I decided that I would clean out all the boxes of all the years that I lived in New York that were in the closet because it was time. And it took me about 5 months and my apartment's relatively not cluttered. It's sort of like, not just unlike what you have going on behind you. There are a lot of pictures, some books, CDs, not a lot of furniture, but it's clean. But there were boxes and boxes and boxes of cassettes. Remember cassettes? Like
Yeah. Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
So I went through all the cassettes and I organized them and I figured out, and I had worked on the side in live performances, with Ed Rosen and Ralph Ferrandina. They were all my friends, and we swapped all kinds of tapes. But I also recorded a lot of my interviews on a cassette player. That was the high-end but small Sony cassette player. I got a call from my friend Ernie Gilbert, who was working at that time. He started VAI Video and audio, was doing CDs, and he said, Louis Quilico heard something you did and he'd like to have you interview him. And I said, what time and what day? You know how that,
Sure, yeah.
Said, as soon as possible.
And think about it, yes.
And he had in his apartment in the West 70s, a library kind of set up. It wasn't too big. It was actually probably similar to what's going on behind you, about double that size, not big. So the sound was really good. And we recorded an interview in 1981 and I just found it. So probably no one's heard it. He talks about Gino. It's so moving. He's going to be singing that next week, Rigoletto at the Met, Louis.
Yeah.
And Gino is singing because of the time difference. He's making his debut in Paris in Barbieri as the barber. And I'm a huge fan of both of them. As a matter of fact, I love them both. But Louis is wonderful. And I won't tell you because it's a surprise. It's hysterical. He talks about a lot of things very openly, and he tells some very funny stories. He's like you. He's a great storyteller. So he tells a story about, I'll only say this, when he was exchanging his money in Japan. And so he had the money exchange into Italian money, and on whatever bill it was Verdi's face. So he was kissing the money, and the teller was going, "Are you okay?" It was in Japan. He said, "Is there something wrong?" Because Louis was kissing he was doing it because Louis had a great sense of humor. He's very charming. The way he told me was funny, but he's a wonderful storyteller. So I hope you'll enjoy it. I'm going to make a separate podcast with a short video because I'd like to bring it up. It's wonderful sound, and make it a little bit, fill it up a little bit with maybe a short cut from a video as well. But it's a delightful memory. And he talks about Gino in such a moving way. Loved him so much. Really was very beautiful.
I did Cenerentola with Gino in Carnegie with Uni. I played the recits on the stage of Carnegie Hall that night.
You did?
Did you hear that? Were you there?
No. Why wasn't I there?
And Eve actually introduced me to Louis as well. Eve and I were walking down the street. We were walking down Broadway. I don't know where we were going, and we ran into Louis. I had heard him sing many times, of course, but I had never met him before.
Do you have desert island recordings that you would never be without? You could have 25 at least.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have to say with Eric, but you could have more than a few.
Not all of them are singers, actually, but yeah, I think that I couldn't live without Birgit Nielsen's recording of Elektra with Scholten.
Oh, okay.
I love that recording.
It's when you collect the way we do, it's very hard when people ask that question, like, who are your favorite sopranos? And it's impossible. But I will say one thing, and I think, it gets to a certain point, you can always change your mind. When Renata Scotto was directing Lucia, after she had sung it, and she said, "You don't need the blood on your dress." And in the early days, she said, "It's in the music and in the singing." And which is true on some level. Later on, when she directed it, she had blood on the dress after Lucia kills Arturo. And she said, But you said you didn't like blood on the wedding dress, and she said, "I changed my mind." I love that. It's one of my favorite things of all time, and I've learned at this age, I can say I've changed my mind and never say never. Those are two very important things to remember. So, but I do have a favorite DVD, which I do not want to be without, which is Maria Ewing, Louis Lima, and Gino Quilico and Zubin Mehta in Carmen is one of my desert island videos, because it's one of those that might not always be out there. You know, it's not the biggest names and that kind of thing, but she's an amazing Carmen. And Louis Lima was he was a really amazing,
he was
wonderful. And Gino was just, Gino was like, you want Escamillo to look like that and sing like that. He got it right. So the whole thing really works. It really does. So on that note, just it's one of the many
I'll
things.
start my list of Desert Island.
Yeah, let's do one. And we invite other people to send them in to us. If anyone knows the priestess from that Aida, let us know.
Yes, I'm very curious.
The Tebaldi Erede Aida, the first one, but there must be somebody that knows. So I think we're there. I do want to recommend to people who have stayed with us and with us here in the podcast, that if you subscribe to Speaking Opera on YouTube, you'll get notifications when Benton and I do our next podcast together. How does that sound?
Sounds good to me.
Okay. I want to thank you, Benton. This has been absolutely wonderful today. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's really wonderful.
You might best to Gino when you talk to Gino Quilico when you talk to him, please.
I will. It's wonderful. You're such a wealth of information, and we'll meet you in another room next time, as long as it's not okay.
Yes.
So we'll be set up and we will keep in touch. And thank you so much. It was so much fun today. Really enjoyed it. I hope the listeners did too. Yes. Take care. Ciao.
Ciao.
Speaking Opera is a non-profit endeavor that focuses on documenting the career activities of currently active singers, composers, musicians, and authors in the field of operatic performance and scholarship, and specialists in the field of audio recording, as well as those who have retired fully or partially from performing and/or teaching. Under Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976, allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use.